Hello and welcome. In this presentation, I'll be discussing process structure in services. Now, process strategy decisions involve four types of decisions: process structure decisions, customer involvement, resource flexibility decisions, and capital intensity. Now, our focus here is on process structure, specifically in service context. Now, to understand process structure in services, it's important to understand different dimensions of customer contact because customer contact plays a very important role in service processes. Now, one dimension within customer contact could be that of physical presence, which means whether the customer is physically present when the service is being offered or the customer is absent. Depending on that, we could decide whether it's a high contact service process or a low contact service process. The second could be what is being processed. Is it the person's expectations, requirements, or possessions or information about the person? And that again will dictate whether it's a high contact service process or a low contact service process. The contact intensity, active, visible uh, intensity of contact with the customer in high contact settings, whereas passive, out of sight in a low contact setting. So there would be different types of service processes that will fit into these two categories. Personal attention that needs to be paid again will vary from being highly personal in terms of what is needed by the customer versus relatively impersonal, as in what the customer might need. So that would be the fourth dimension of customer contact. And finally, the method of delivery, face to face versus regular mail or electronic. So you can think of different contexts, whether it's consulting, legal services, restaurants, hotels. You would see certain processes that would fall under the high contact kind of setting, and there would be certain processes which will fall under the low contact kind of setting. So it is important to keep that in mind when we are structuring the process for the service. Now, to really understand how process structure needs to be put in place for services, we will be looking at a framework, and that framework uses two dimensions. One dimension is customer contact and customization. So they are put together as part of one dimension. And by customer contact, now, given that we understand there are different dimensions to customer contact, what we really refer to is the extent to which the customer is present, is actively involved, and receives personal attention during the service process. Right? So that's part of the customer contact. And customization is the service level that can range from being customized to standardized. So we will look at where does this service process belong in this continuum with regards to customer contact and customization. The other dimension that the framework relies on is what we call process divergence and flow, where process divergence refers to the extent to which the process is highly customized with considerable latitude as to how its tasks are performed. So customers can dictate how this task will be performed. So therefore, a lot more customization in the process itself. And flow refers to how the work will progress through the sequence of steps. So is it a line flow where you sequentially go from one step to the other? Or is it much more jumbled depending on the customer requirements? You might have to go from step 1 to step 5 for one customer, step 1 to step 2 for another customer, and so on and so forth. So that would be a dimension which comprises of process divergence and flow. Together with these two dimensions, what we have is a framework which we refer to as customer contact matrix. Now, one unique feature or important feature that we see here for this matrix is that we have something in the diagonal of this matrix. So we have three different types of service process structures that have been placed in the diagonal of this matrix, and we will see why there's nothing in the off diagonal spaces out here. But before we can get to that, let's understand exactly what's going on with the x-axis and y-axis. On the x-axis, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our dimension, which is customer contact and customization. As we go from left to right, we have less customer contact and less customization. In the y-axis, we have process divergence and flow. As we go from top to bottom, we have less process divergence and more of a line flow, right? So So we'll take each of these service process structures and understand exactly what that means. So we take the example of front office here. Front office refers to a process structure which has high interaction with customers, highly customized services, and uses flexible flows with individualized processes. So this would be a direct engagement between consulting uh, personnel with a client, directly engaging with them in terms of what the customer wants and therefore getting all that requirement. It also is the front desk in a hotel, reception in a hotel, where there's a direct interaction, and sometimes there could be different kinds of requirements that needs to be processed based on the customers. The second service process structure that we have is a hybrid process, hybrid office, which is flexible flows with some dominant paths and some exceptions as to how the work will be performed. But there's some bit of standardization here. And as far as customer contact is concerned, there is some interaction with customers, but standard services with some options that are being offered. So that would be a hybrid office kind of a service structure. And finally, you have the back office, which is one where you have low interaction with customers, very standardized services. And as far as process divergence is concerned, it's a line flow, routine work performed the same with all customers. So therefore, you have three different kinds of structures depending on the level of customer contact and customization and the process divergence and flow that you have for that service context. Now, if you look at these off-diagonal spaces, this off-diagonal space refers to a situation where you have low interaction with customers, standardized services, but you're offering that using flexible flow with individualized processes. Now, having low interaction with customers, standardized services, and having flexible flows, they're sort of incompatible. Right? So you do not want to have standardized services being offered with flexible flows because it can be very expensive. So essentially, this would be an example which is inefficient sort of way of doing things. So something which is an inefficient use of resources by having flexible flow for standardized services. On the other hand, if you have high interaction with customers, highly customized services, and you are trying to achieve a line flow for it, routine work to be performed for such kinds of interaction, this is something which is infeasible because customer demands a lot more flexibility with regards to what needs to be accomplished, right? So there's infeasibility and inefficiency, which are in these two spaces. Hence, normally when you're structuring services, they will be in the diagonal depending on where in the continuum you belong. Now, once that customer contact matrix helps you determine what exactly should the structure be, whether it's a front office, hybrid office, or back office, that will then dictate how the layout of that service facility should be, the physical arrangement of operations or departments relative to each other, because your process divergence and line flow will be critically dependent on how the layout is. Your customer contact and customization activities will also be critically determined by how the layout is. So essentially, the operation, which is a group of human and capital resources performing all parts, how you're going to physically arrange them will play a very important role when you're structuring the services, which is based on customer contact matrix. So overall, in this presentation, I discussed how we structure processes within services, what are some of the important things to keep in mind, and how we can map the customer contact and customization with process divergence and flow. Thank you.